I do feel that we're going through a huge shift at the moment. The current financial system, the current business system is so utterly messed up. We will have to come to really value the less kind of formal wisdoms, which, are so clear in the whole fair trading process, through the farmers and their work, care with which they grow plants and take their pests off by hand, to each of those incredible processes that come in setting up a hand loom and then weaving fabric. There's so much to celebrate, isn't there, in life? I find that enthralling, really enthralling.
For episode 50, my guest is Safia Minney, who I caught up with on Anti-Slavery Day last year. An issue that isn't just for faraway lands, but actually something happening under your nose wherever you live. In this conversation, we discuss modern-day slavery, consumerism, and justice. Safia is a pioneer, activist, and social entrepreneur who founded the global sustainable brand People Tree. She is the author of 9 books, including Slave to Fashion, Naked Fashion, and Slow Fashion. I have known Safia and followed her work for over a decade, since I started my own jewellery label and was working for the Ethical Fashion Forum, raising awareness about these issues. This is something very close to my heart, as we all wear clothes, no matter if we are into fashion, so to speak, or not. From one item of clothing we buy, we can understand how all our global systems work, from farming to advertising, and we can follow that thread of corruption and injustice. By understanding better what we wear and how our global systems work, we can make better choices as active citizens. We all need to rise up in solidarity. If you want to start, you can download a resource from my website, amisha.co.uk, which I made some years ago, called 12 Rules to Dress By, which takes you through the core issues you consider when buying clothes and has a wardrobe shopping checklist. And if you would like to join my Presence mentoring program for some focus on clearing your patterning and integrating supportive practices into your life, the next cohort starts in February and applications are open now. You can find out more about this over at www.amisha.co.uk/leadership. This conversation is a reminder that each of us, who may feel ordinary, can do something extraordinary that can have a strong and beautiful impact in the world. I hope that this inspires you. As always, please do write to us and tell us how this conversation has moved you. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Safia, I'm so delighted to welcome you to the show. Thank you.
Great to be on the show. Thanks very much for the invitation.
It's really wonderful to speak to you because I feel like you are somebody that has been doing so much around the world, around fair trade, around ethical fashion, and around modern day slavery. And these are huge issues of our time. And although most of us are aware of them, I think it can become quite distant when we pick our clothes and we buy our coffee and we go about our day-to-day life. And so I'm really excited for you to share some of the other side of the story with us so that it can become a bit more present to us and then hopefully will help us to make better decisions. So is it right that there are about 21 million slaves in today's world?
Actually, it's 41 million slaves in today's world. And when I wrote Slave to Fashion, the official number was 21 million. But yes, now with more research and more awareness levels, we know the number is 41 million. And, it's great to be talking to you on Anti-Slavery Day. We all have a disquieting feeling, don't we, if we look at food or clothes or manicures, when we very quickly we can calculate that the price isn't right. It doesn't cover the cost of a living wage of the people that are involved in making that product, nor does it cover the environmental costs of making that product. And I think, I've really had that kind of disquieting feeling ever since I started work in publishing when I was 17. I think it's important, and it's actually very exciting to me that there's now a huge awareness of the exploitative practices that go into producing the products that we buy every day, and that it is totally environmentally unsustainable.
As well as what it does for the humans involved in it. On both sides as well, because it's not healthy, the relationship that we have with our consuming, and then of course for people making clothes. Can you kind of illustrate to us like what the difference is on the other side? So I guess cotton's an easy example to grasp of the difference in the life of a farmer that's growing organic cotton and organic and fair trade cotton, and a farmer that's growing pesticide, non-fair trade cotton.
Yes. Well, actually, it's lovely that you have your close relationship with India. I have mine ancestrally too. My great-grandparents on my father's side were from India. And it's quite interesting because the organic movement, what is now, the whole kind of slow food movement and the GOTS, the Organic Cotton Textile Standard, I mean, that back in the day, came from India. It came from smallholder farmers who would work with incredible respect to the land. I think the examples are very stark. If I walked in when I was setting up People Trees Organic fair trade cotton supply chains, if I'd walked onto a conventional cotton field, it would have been as hard as tarmac in Heathrow Airport. Whereas if you went into the organic cotton field, it would be spongy underfoot. You would see, crops, organic cotton with eggplant and then a bit of tomato and then some flowers and some other vegetables. So it was a very, very different environment. The fertility of the soil was incredibly impressive. Today, when climate change is such a pressing issue, the fact that soil is actually retaining water, it's creating the opportunity for farmers to survive terrible, unexpected drought. So it's really mitigating climate change. At the same time, it's sequestering a lot of CO2 into the soil itself. So the actual ecosystem of organic cotton is so very, very different. But the fact that it also, through the premiums paid to fair trade and organic cotton farmers, means that they have an extra 30% that they're then deciding themselves whether they spend on schooling for their kids or a handicraft project, so they've got work when they're not growing cotton and other crops. It's never the case, by the way, I'd like to explain, it's never the case that they're only growing organic cotton for the export market. It's a rotational crop, so it's rotated with green gram, which is like a kind of like a lentil. It's a pulse with bananas, with other types of crops, which of course are consumed by the farmer, and he sells the surplus or she sells the surplus into the local market. So it's very much a celebration of an empowered ecosystem and that of the community of farmers. Yeah, I'm a very, very great fan of organic cotton. Many people who are listening to your podcast might well have seen Stacey Dooley's documentary, which of course gave conventional cotton growing a very bad rap. And it is absolutely true that cotton produced in a certain way, highly agricultural, chemical intensive, water intensive, is utterly not sustainable. Having said that, if it's grown responsibly and farmers get a good price for it, if it's grown organically, it is the mainstay for many developing countries, peoples. In the west of Africa, it could be more than 60% of GDP. So I think it's really about celebrating organic cotton as a totally natural fibre that can be grown in harmony with the environment, in harmony with the other activities of the farmers that grow it, and really locking CO2 and water in the ground.
And so then that compared with the other side of the picture, which is, I mean, if you're growing cotton with pesticides, then you can't be growing food on the same land.
No, that's right. So it's very much an intensive crop. It would generally cost about 10% of the production costs for highly toxic pesticides, insecticides and fertilizers. They're often WHO banned chemicals that we wouldn't be using here in the so-called developed world. I think it's utterly shocking that we would allow for that level of pollution, which is being done in our name, for the cotton clothes that we're buying. And of course that's happening with synthetics. If you look at the microfiber issue now, there's more than 250,000 of these 1 to 5 millimeter strands of plastic that are being dispersed into the water with every wash of a fleece hoodie. So, we really need to think about our textile consumption. For starters, we shouldn't be consuming as much new product. We should be loving it. It should be lasting longer. We should be washing it less frequently. But if we're going to buy new, we should be buying organic, biodegradable materials, and we should certainly be buying them from companies that have ethics, the best possible fair trade and ethical practice, top of the agenda.
And so, I mean, the stories that I've heard of farmers in India, for example, that are working with pesticide cotton, is that there are all of these kind of loopholes in the process of how you have to buy the cotton, and then the illnesses that come out of it and the cost of medication. And we've seen a really high suicide rate as a result of this. And sort of most graphically described as farmers drinking the pesticides themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you explain why that happens, what that actually means?
Yes. Well, I think that farmers the world over actually are often, very, very economically disadvantaged. And in the developing countries, these are the poorest people in the world. And they're caught in a poverty trap that is having no political voice, very, very little access to market. They are often exploited. Their crops are they're rarely paid the production cost of their crops. And what this does is it forces them into a corner. So when you then introduce, for example, Monsanto with its genetically modified seeds, and you make the seeds themselves a commodity, you have a situation where poor farmers can't even save their seeds for the following year. So you have them, dependent on pesticide-producing companies, often the same as the seed companies. They may also not even own the land that they're growing the crop on. So they are incredibly vulnerable. So it will tip them over the edge, dependent on the price that's being paid for cotton that year, the kind of climate that they might have had to endure with their crop that year, whether a particular pest has come into their fields. It can be biblical. I remember being in Gujarat and watching, just in 3 hours, a swarm of locusts come into the place where we were staying. I mean, we literally couldn't eat, we couldn't go to the toilet without a crustacean of literally hundreds and hundreds of locusts around us. And and these things basically strip the crops bare. I think what we need to do is we need to find that appreciation for our food, for our clothes, for the products that we use, and understand that these are not given to nature. Doesn't give them to us free of charge. They come with environmental costs, they come with environmental risk, and those risks are usually borne by the most vulnerable people in the world. Those very people are actually the most affected now by climate change and by the issues that we're facing today. So we need to learn a whole level of new accounting, of new enforcement of legislation to hold companies accountable. These vulnerable people actually, I feel very strongly, deserve a voice. And without that voice, without often, the fair trade system, the NGO system, the trade unions, they very often do not have a voice. This is a very, very dysfunctional economic system that we're part of today. It doesn't have to be like this, but this is what we're part of today.
So just to kind of spell that out a little bit more, because I think often we don't really want to understand what that really means. And I liked that you used the title Slave to Fashion for your book, and obviously there's that whole kind of cultural thing of being a slave to fashion, that you're just like really into fashion. But this word slavery is quite triggering for a lot of people, because there's a sense that, oh well, we did that and we dealt with that and that's gone now. You know, those times we wouldn't do anything so barbaric now. And actually the reality is that we are, but it just looks different. It's happening in different parts of the world. People are potentially being paid as well in this process. So there's a sense that, like, you know, often you hear like, well, it's great because people have jobs. And so if the more I consume, the more people, you know, get paid, and these kind of warped notions. Can you explain what modern day slavery looks like and what it is?
Yes, modern day slavery is forced and bonded labour. It's child labour. It's excessive overtime, and then it's human trafficking. And I've tried to cover and personalise slaves that are caught or have been caught in those different forms of modern day slavery in my book, Slave to Fashion. I think you're right, it's really, really difficult. You know, my great-grandmother her and her husband got on a boat in India to Mauritius because they thought they were signing up to be farm labourers for 3 years and that they would come back to India. But when they got to Mauritius, they realised that the contract actually was for life. And I suppose, but we do think of that as something that, you know, pretty much finished, you know, in the last hundreds of years. But actually, we have a very, very quiet violence that affects actually all of us. I mean, none of us are separate from this because we are all connected. But when you go into the developing world and you look at the position of the most vulnerable, who will often be women and children, what you'll find is that without a voice, without laws that are enforced, and without, even what I would call the basic levels of human rights being respected by corporations. So what you'll find is that the most vulnerable people in society, you know, are having this war waged upon them day upon day, just, you know, getting up, going to their factory, having to navigate through very, very awkward situations of near sexual assault and very often what they call in India or Bangladesh eaves teasing, you know. So there's a kind of a constant threat of violence that is both physical and a psychological violence. To then, you know, be in a factory with often supervisors who are men, who are forcing, you know, higher productivity targets, who are forbidding them to go to the toilet, cutting their tea breaks. I met a lot of women who would say, you know, if only I could have a 15-minute tea break in a 5-hour shift. Well, this is just insane. How could they possibly be expected to toil on a sewing machine doing a repetitive function like sewing just a cuff onto a shirt, for example, or a pocket onto a pair of jeans for 5 hours without going to a toilet when they're having their period? I mean, you know, it's just absolutely bonkers. We would make it sound light because we do have the freedom to go to the toilet when we want. We do have a sanitary hygiene product, and, you know, we don't have to spend a whole day's wage actually on you know, a pack of sanitary napkins and worry about whether we're bleeding heavily, and we can, you know, ration ourselves on 2 a day. You know, these tiny little issues, plus making your lunch and taking it to your factory and eating outside, are all things that women worry about on a day-to-day basis. And they're paid so insufficiently that they are, you know, malnourished. They're eating often as little as 1,100 calories a day, doing a highly physical piece of work. You won't see many women actually who are over the age of 30 in those garment factories because they're like milk cows. They're basically thrown away, you know, when they're in their early and mid 30s. Frankly, I don't even know what they go on to do.
I was going to ask where they end up after that. Because there's also like the kind of false promise that you're doing this in order to just like a lot of people listening, trying to get a step on a ladder to something else, to progress, to be able to start a family, buy a house, whatever it is. And actually, a lot of these factory workers don't really come away with a lot after that whole experience as well.
I think that's true. A lot of women will find themselves, certainly they will have taken such a knock in terms of their health, which isn't necessary. As you say, they could work in a very, very hard job for 10 years and they could still maintain their health and then retire to start a family at the age of 30 or whatever. But that isn't the setup that we have currently. And I think that's deeply distressing, which is why we need living wages. It's why we need labour and trade unions to really represent and give people voice and power to negotiate.
And with child labour, like it feels like it's something that has been less present in the media, almost again like one of these, we solved that one kind of, those sort of ideas that we have in the media. A little bit. I don't feel like it's so present. Do you feel like more of it is underground from your research?
It's very, very present in most of the developing countries that I've visited, whether that's in India or Bangladesh, and in much of the developing world. If you're a teen, you're expected to work. In Bangladesh, there are reduced hours that you can work if you're over the age of 16, overtime shifts that you can't work, for example. So even though there is legislation to protect overwork or working like an adult at the age of 16, you will find teenagers working as much as their parents, for example, up to 70 hours a week. But, I was finding kids of the age of 14 and 15 that have been in garment factories, finishing clothes, which means, cutting little threads off with scissors, and that kind of activity, since they were 11 and 12. In the Jinneries, for example, in India, there are still very, very young children, as young as 9 and 10. There's also something called the Sumangali system, which uses younger, often girls, with a view to, once they've finished a contract of 3 or 5 years, sending them back with some money, which would be for their dowry. I'm quite against the whole dowry system.
Yeah.
But in fact, if you were to calculate that in labour, they've completely under-earned if you were paying them, a fair wage. And it is illegal, even by Indian law, to be employing children or young teens in that way. So I think it's about law enforcement. I mean, the forms of slavery are everywhere in the developing world, and our supply chains, the products that we're buying on the high street, without question, there is slavery in the supply chains. I think it was very exciting when the British government, at the end of 2015, brought in the Modern Slavery Act, because that meant that companies here in the UK with a turnover of more than £36 million per year are required to report on what they're doing to eradicate slavery. So there is a supply chain transparency piece there, which means that civil society and actually more progressive companies and institutions that are now campaigning for fairer trade, like the Ethical Trade Initiative, for example, that there is a body now that can push for better practice, but we really have a long way to go. So I think it's up to us as citizens, as civil society, to really raise our awareness, to spread awareness amongst our friends and family. Fortunately now we have more materials to do that, don't we? We have the True Cost movie, we have great books out there. So I think it is about really understanding our part in this awful picture of slavery and how to avoid it. And I know there are friends of mine that have, stopped going to car washes. They wash their car at home. They don't go to nail bars because they're a bit worried about. Of course, we could also have the confidence to go into a nail bar and say, could you reassure me that everybody here is earning, a London living wage? I mean, that would be an interesting question, wouldn't it, to be asking around nail bars?
Yeah.
Often there are a lot of Eastern Europeans that are brought to the UK, and they may well be earning as little as a couple of pounds per hour. Slavery is absolutely prevalent. Even in Britain, we will find millions and millions of people that are caught in a form of slavery within the UK itself. I really encourage people to have a look. There's some amazing work being done at the moment. There's if you follow me on Twitter, or some of the links that I have on Twitter will point you to different news sources so that you can really keep yourself up to date.
And can you share like what you feel like we need to know from that research and from that news?
Well, gosh, I mean, I don't think that there is an alternative than being an ethical consumer. I think engaging our intelligence and our commitment to social justice is critical with regard both to human rights and to avoiding products that have been made with slavery, buying from ethical pioneers like People Tree or Pozu or some of the many brands now that you can find on different platforms, whether it's Common Objective, or there are many, or in fact just consuming less, really repurposing, upcycling, swapping clothes with friends,
holding on to things, treasuring them,
mending, repairing. Yes, absolutely. And I think that that goes, of course, right the way through into food as well. It has to be fair trade, locally sourced, organic. I think we really need to make a much stronger case, both for to protect the environment as well as workers' rights.
And so, with your incredible work setting up People Tree, and People Tree has been one of the most consistent brands within the sustainable ethical fashion space. It's been going for so many years and is an amazing resource for affordable and like everyday and work kind of clothing. Can you share what it was like to set that up and the challenges and kind of how you feel like that space is opening up?
Yes, I think it was certainly setting up People Tree had many challenges, but I was very fortunate. I had really great first volunteers and then team members, people who came from different specialisms of design or merchandising or technical or marketing or accounts and finance. What was really exciting was just being able to look at these amazing groups. Firstly, we'd have literally dozens of groups coming to us saying we'd love to work with you, and I'd have to be obviously very careful because we were at our heyday, we were growing at kind of 30% a year, which was great, but you didn't want to kind of overstretch in terms of the relationships with fair trade partners, because we take them very seriously in terms of our commitment to them too. But I think the two real pillars were their openness in terms of embracing more sustainable forms of production, and the second one was definitely their policy and their activities around women's gender empowerment, which kind of back in the day, kind of 25 years ago, was quite new. But we recognised that if women were not present 50-50 on the boards and the management teams, we would unlikely have a more equal process in terms of delivering fair wages to women and all of the support mechanisms that women need. So, we set up, for example, the first creche in Bangladesh in a village. Schooling for the children was supported. We would discuss issues around domestic violence and, really focus on all of the issues that really unlock the empowerment that women need. One of the other challenges certainly was that we were developing this model of fair trade manufacture. So the first ones to develop the Global Organic Cotton Textile Standard of a product that was produced in the developing world, organic cotton dresses like the beautiful one that you're wearing today. We're also the first organisation to pilot the World Fair Trade Organisation fair trade management system. So I think all of those processes of developing the model and developing the market, and in many cases the kind of the how-to around the distribution and retail, I think that was quite tricky. So it did feel quite kind of schizophrenic. You're working very hard to make sure that you were generating as much social impact and doing the best possible thing on the ground. At the same time, you were consumer facing or working with Selfridges or Topshop or the 800 independents that we work with worldwide, thinking, how can I make the product, better, but also how can I communicate this message of fair trade and sustainability to a customer that actually doesn't really find that interesting right now. You know, do I do that through talking about handicraft textile, or do I do that to talking about this particular type of historic culture of this particular product? You know, how do you do it? And I think that's been very interesting. And, you know, over the years, I've made about 6 documentaries in Japan and written 9 books. And there's not really been a moment when we could just say, oh yeah, great, we've done it, because it's the problem has just become more and more pronounced with fast fashion and the speed at which people are expecting to consume synthetic fibers. So yes, I mean, it doesn't really. Yes, it's kind of difficult to really get one's head around the scale of how destructive the fashion industry is, and how huge, really, Peopletree and the other brands that are also now existing in the same marketplace need to be to truly counter what's going on. We need to be much larger. And I think the only way to create an opportunity to do that is to have a much more level playing field. We need laws that would ban and enforce human rights, and where we could be sure that Peopletree's products or Pozu's products were not competing alongside products made by slaves in synthetics that take 500 years to biodegrade. I mean, it's a dysfunctional market, and that's something that goes beyond the energetically run pioneering brands, of which there are many today. We need legislation, and we need a framework that allows them to compete, I think.
How have you managed to keep Peopletree, relevant and growing through that, and now with Pozu as well? Yeah, how did you survive that without that legislation? Because it is so much work. And, I was working for the Ethical Fashion Forum years ago and have been involved in this movement quite a lot. And I've seen a lot of brands come and go. I've seen a lot of times where the kind of the values and the vision and then the challenges and the reality sort of make the project implode a little bit. Where have you found that consistency?
I think we've been very creative, but we've also been quite linear in many ways. I think that the kind of magic ingredient also came from collaboration, and I think that's really helped. So, we have a very strong organic and fair trade food business in Japan and clothing line. By starting Peopletree in London, it meant that we were able to use fabrics over a wider region, which meant that we could innovate. We had larger minimum order quantities that we could produce, which meant that we were unlocking new types of fabrication, and that was absolutely key. And then we would collaborate with influencers like Emma Watson, or designers like Orla Kylie or Zandra Rhodes or Boraxu or Takun, and I think that helped us to move ethical and fair trade fashion from that kind of granola-y image to it can be high fashion and stylish, and you can wear it to a business meeting or out on a date, and I think there was a lot of stigma around what fair trade fashion used to be 30 years ago. Yeah, I think we've been lucky. We've had a really, really committed team, a lot of people who feel passionately that they want to be part of the change. It is incredibly tough. I think I had a day's maternity leave for each of my children and went back to work. And I guess I wouldn't necessarily advise that to anybody now starting up. With Pozu, I think also, collaboration's been so interesting because we linked up with Star Wars. We have these incredible boots that are just gorgeous. They're Sven Segal, who founded Pozu, is the most incredible designer. So using sustainable materials like organic cotton and tweeds and cork and chrome-free leather, and it's amazing materials. So we're making the replicas of the boots and shoes in the film, which has just been utterly bonkers, and it's taken sustainability mainstream. There are more customers in the US than in the UK, which is just incredible. So I think it is for very much important for ethical brands to you've got to look at the commercials, you've got to have the creativity and the vision at the same time to collaborate, because we clearly need to mainstream ethical products, right?
Absolutely. Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you, so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. Where does your energy come from, and where does it keep coming from to keep going and to be so prolific and involved? Because as well as running these brands and the books, the documentaries, you also are so involved with the NGOs and with the producers directly. Yeah, and you have children and a husband.
Well, I'm not, gosh, it all comes from the same place, which I think is, and I was discussing this with my son this morning, we met for breakfast. He said, I'm trying to work out what my kind of core values are, Mum. I said, that's really interesting. And he said, what are yours? And I said, justice. And he said, that's amazing, that's exactly what mine is. And I said, yes, well, that's not surprising, is it? Anyway, but I think, there is a sense of justice, which I think kind of crops up in every aspect of life, doesn't it? What's really exciting also is working with crafts and working with really exceptional entrepreneurs, women who might have only had 2 or 3 years at school, but are just so so clever and so capable and so committed. And I do feel that we're going through a huge shift at the moment. The current financial system, the current business system is so utterly messed up, and we will have to come to really value the less kind of formal wisdoms, which are so clear in the whole fair trading process, through the farmers and their work, care with which they grow plants and take the pests off by hand, to each of those incredible processes that come in setting up a hand loom and then weaving fabric that we would then create something with. I mean, there's so much to celebrate, isn't there, in life? I find that enthralling, really enthralling.
And how do you handle the harder elements of it, the realities that you come face to face with, especially, for example, when you were researching your latest book? You will have seen a lot of disturbing and horrific things. How do you handle that and integrate that?
It certainly can be really, really difficult, and I think when people have said, "Don't forget me, don't forget my plight, please communicate this," typically a highly exploited Bangladeshi garment factory worker will say, "Look, Safia, I really want things to improve, but I want to keep my job. I don't want my factory to close, but I just need people who buy my clothes to understand that I'm really giving everything here. I'm giving, what feels like my blood." And I think, those stories that, it's difficult to kind of come away from that scene and not take it on as a kind of personal quest. And with Slave to Fashion, it was quite interesting because the people that I met who had escaped from slavery, I was wearing 20 really, really thin silver rings, and I gave them, each one of them, one of my little silver rings. I still wear two, actually. And for me, that was also kind of a binding, which I think, I'm not a rich woman. I can't sort everyone's problems, but we do have a dysfunctional system. We need to spread awareness about that, and we need to be part of building solutions. And I think that's really, really important. But yes, I do feel really pathetic because I know that I can't bring about huge change in the way that huge change needs to be delivered overnight. But it doesn't stop you from trying, does it?
No. Thank you for sharing that. Because sometimes I think we focus so much on what we're doing out there, and there's always another side of it. And often it's that other side of it that puts other people off from getting involved.
Yes.
And so it's that recognition that it's important anyway, and that, I guess, in a way, sort of knowing that you're living your core values, that you're doing what you can, is a much more kind of satisfying human experience than whatever else that comes with, whatever the cost is.
Yes, and I think, we certainly have to be aware of the responsibility that we have as actually quite well placed, women in the developed world. We have a voice, we have relative equal rights, we are tech savvy, we're media savvy, we can actually get the word out there. I find myself recently quite pissed off actually with kind of middle class, professional class women who just seem kind of complicit in this kind of very faulty capitalist system. I was on the bus the other day and a couple of women behind me were talking about how one of them was a stylist at Boohoo and the other one was working for another fast fashion brand. And I just thought, God, what are we doing? We're not guilty of slavery in that we didn't bring that person from the village and put her into a factory at the age of 13, but here we are as educated women helping to create this marketing message, whether that's as a stylist or as a copywriter or a photographer or as even a model for that matter, or as a production assistant or whatever.
Or in the advertising agencies.
Yes, exactly. And I think we need to understand our part in it and not be complicit in actually something that we wouldn't sit well with our values.
It's like, as you said that, I just suddenly imagined the Bangladeshi woman in the factory kind of locked up in somebody's garden in London, and it actually is like that, but we feel very removed from it. But actually, if any of us look around the room that we're in right now whilst listening to this, and obviously the devices that we're using and everything that our house is made up of, furniture, furnishings, clothing, then we realise how complicit we are. And it is like we're saying, yes, this is okay. But because we're sort of slightly removed from the brutality, we just lose that connection to what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for those of us that are listening, that are going, like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. We've talked about changing our attitudes to our wardrobes and actually just to everything that we own. And do we need this? Do we really need a new this? Do we really need to travel there just for a few days? Like all of these kind of ways that we can slow everything down and be, not even minimalist, but just considered in our consuming action. And you talked about being more aware of what's going on in terms of what's happening in the developing world and in terms of slavery, and in terms of just being more aware of what NGOs are doing and how we can support campaigns. Is there anything else that you feel like we can bring into our kind of daily way of being? It sounds like also that step of thinking about how we earn our money as well and what we do for a living, and
absolutely
reevaluating that in terms of how that fits with our values.
Yes, I think so. And we're lucky in many ways, in many respects, because there are alternatives out there. We can buy from ethical brands, whether it's clothing or food or energy. We can work now in this growing sector of social enterprise and social business. We might have to work for a conventional company for 3 or 4 years to learn the ropes, to then take that expertise into a company and that is truly ethically driven, and use our energy there. We can invest ethically. We don't have to invest or expect to support, the arms trade or there's lots and lots and lots positively has changed. Politics has got a little way to go still, but there's some real excitement around the supply chain traceability, and the Modern Slavery Act. I think we're going to see some huge change in the next 5 to 10 years. So this is a time to get really active.
Mm-hmm. And on this thing of our core values, how do you think that our core values are kind of formed through our childhoods and our ancestry, or do you think that there's something that we can just choose to have?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've just started with a friend of mine writing a book about my mum.
Another one?
Well, it's not really me writing it, it's my friend writing it actually, but it's about my mum.
Amazing.
Yes, who is a very, very, in her words, ordinary woman, because she just brought up 3 kids. But she did it single-handedly because my dad died when I was 7. And it's been really interesting kind of tracing my maternal grandparents and my paternal grandparents to find that there seems to be this kind of pro-social gene thing. My mother's family were kind of social workers, and but then they ran a publishing company, and then my grandfather was a politician, and my grandmother was, she ran the publishing company and the bookshop whilst he was doing his politics and stuff. And I think so that there is a lot, I think, that comes from family. And I think we really need to be mindful of the experience that we're creating for our children, to act. So my mum, when she was a voluntary social worker after my father had died, helped to settle Ugandan refugees, and we would come along with her, and so she would be getting secondhand furniture for their homes and helping them with schools and doctors and that kind of thing. And then she would also work with people who were suffering from different forms of kind of mental illness, and that was a very positive experience for me as a child growing up, because I understood that people were very, very different, which was quite useful because I grew up in a very, very white kind of home counties area. In fact, I didn't realise that I was of colour until I came into London. It was so white. So I think, yes, it is. It can be very much part of your family. I think we can also create those experiences. And, we're incredibly lucky to be living in London and working in London because, we do have so much opportunity to really learn from each other's cultures, don't we?
Absolutely. And actually, wherever we are now, because we have access to, if we have access to the internet, then we have access to stories from everywhere all of the time.
Absolutely, we really do. It's so exciting, isn't it, that there are so many solutions in other cultures that perhaps we can learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really wonderful to speak to you. And we'll post links to everything that you've mentioned on the blog. So we'll have all of the books and People Tree and Fuzu.
Lovely.
And then, of course, you have your own website. It's safiaminney.com, where we can find links to everything.
Great. That's lovely. Well, thanks ever so much for today. I've really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?